The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
It's American Thanksgiving. For the first time in the history of the show, we will not do pretenders and contenders. Basically, we're recording this on a Wednesday night to Thursday. We don't know what the standings are going to look like when we enter Thursday morning. It's probably best we don't do that. Instead, we're going to talk a lot about these trade talks and rumors and discussion that's been happening the last few days. I think that's a lot more interesting. Big Money Siege. What are you hearing?
Well, a lot. I mean, I really don't recall a period this early in the season where there's been so much bubbling. I mean, so many teams that are clearly not happy with their starts that are feeling pressure to try to shake things up. You've got some teams that thought they were good and some teams that even look good in the standings that are trying to trade players away. It's just been a unique start to the year. I don't know that there's anything we can attribute it to. I don't think it's not about the changing CBA landscape or like, I think it's really just a cyclical thing where a number of teams have come into this window where they have to get better and where they can't be idle, where they don't have the ability to be patient. And so, it's been really fascinating. We're not even into December. I know we haven't yet, as of this recording, had what I'd call a significant trade during the season, but there have been some smaller moves made. We've now seen 2 head coaches fired in the last week and a half here, and it just feels like more is percolating. So, the old trope used to be that teams waited till Thanksgiving to evaluate where they were at to start looking around the league. I mean, that definitely has not been the case for the 2024-25 NHL season. I mean, there's just a number of front offices that are highly motivated to try and make things happen. And so I don't think we're too far off seeing some things happen.
I go for everyone in the hockey landscape when I say this. I hope something happens. A lot of talk, a lot of people saying, oh, we're in discussions. Oh, we'd like to make this move if it's out there. But if this ends up being, just a week or two of just nothing, I will be very disappointed.
Well, I can only tell you what I know is being discussed. I can't tell you 100% this will happen, 100% that will happen.
It's on your crystal ball, CJ. You have a crystal ball.
No, I wish I had one. It would make this job a lot easier because the question is always what's going to happen next. And, you can only sort of put everything together and forecast what you think is going to go down. But, even the teams themselves maybe don't know. But, certainly there's going to be some trades in the near future. We got until roughly mid-December when the holiday roster freeze kicks in and all player movement for all intents and purposes stops. So we've got a few weeks here, and I do think you're going to see some action.
Okay, let's get into David Jiricek, the Columbus Blue Jackets prospect, first-round pick from 2022. Feels like there's a new team attached to him every single day. At least it's been that case this week. What are you hearing about David Jiricek?
Well, it's my understanding Columbus has had extensive talks with a number of teams on Jiricek. And at this point, I think we can safely say the Blue Jackets have made up their mind. They're trading the 6th overall pick from 2022, that it's really about working through the offers, working through the position to understand his value around the league, and then eventually, making a deal. And I think that deal could come in the relatively near future here. I think Columbus has talked with at least 8 teams. And it might be more, but eight was the number I was quoted in terms of teams that had some interest in him. Initially the Blue Jackets were looking for other sort of top prospects like him. As you might imagine, a lot of those teams probably aren't all that willing to give up their top prospect. And so I think now we're at the stage where the Blue Jackets are considering package type returns for Jiricek, which could end up being a prospect and a pick, could even maybe be a roster player and a prospect and a pick, something like that. But it does seem like it's getting a little bit closer. And we do know that the Minnesota Wild are probably what I would call the front runner at this stage. I think they're the team, off to such a great start this season, have a number of pretty coveted prospects in their organization. And I think are pretty motivated to try to make this deal happen. And so, to me, they feel like the favorite, but Nashville is called. Pittsburgh is in on every young player in the league. We saw Kyle Dubas acquire Philip Tomasimo this week from Nashville. I think Philadelphia is showing some interest around the margins. I know at one point Vancouver was linked here. Montreal might have been linked here. you go down the list. But I think if we're going to focus in, Minnesota or Pittsburgh are probably the two most likely destinations, I'd say, as of now for Jiricek. And we'll just have to see if they can get something across the finish line. But, it's a big trade because on one hand, you're like, yeah, this guy hasn't really established himself in the NHL. Obviously, part of Jiricek's story is he was drafted by a different front office in Columbus than exists now. He's played under a number of different coaching staffs. He's had trouble establishing himself in a firm role there and is currently now down the American Hockey League with Cleveland. But he's also a 6'4" right shot defenseman who's just turning 21 here in the coming days. He's got all kinds of promise. He has a very enviable tool set. There's a reason he was picked as high as he was. And so obviously teams that are engaging here believe that, whatever weaknesses they may see in his game or areas that maybe he hasn't matured or developed fully, that they are going to be able to do so. And so I feel like there's high risk on this from the Blue Jackets end of, giving up on a player too soon that they used a very high pick on after a very difficult season. I mean, that's a flip side no one talks about, Julian. When you pick 6th overall, you had a pretty crappy year. Like you lost a lot of games to get even a 6th overall pick. And, I know that you get more than just that one pick, but if you're already, moving on from that pick, I think it's important that you get a return that can at least make you feel like that lost season just a couple of years ago was for something. And so, that's kind of my best sense of where things are. But, as of Wednesday night, obviously nothing is done here. The holiday in the U.S. does complicate things with most of the teams and front offices based there, but it does seem like there's a fair bit of smoke on the horizon around Columbus these days.
So how did Columbus get here? We know last year Jiricek wanted to play NHL minutes. I know he's not Don Waddell's guy, but this is a team that had to pluck Dante Fabro off of waivers. He looks like he's doing okay, 4 points in 6 games as of this recording. They traded for Jordan Harris in the offseason for the Montreal Canadiens. No points to this point for him. He could be better for the Columbus Blue Jackets, but like Jiricek still can't carve out a spot on this team. Like what's going on there?
Well, it hasn't been a stable environment, right? For the reasons I mentioned, you're changing coaches every year. It's a different, large chunks of the front office have turned over. And Jiricek, naturally, like any young person or any young player would be, I think is frustrated. I mean, he's been in and out of the lineup, scratched here, dressed and plays 8 minutes, sent to Cleveland, back. Like he's really been yanked around. And I'm not saying that he has a part in that, of course. I mean, if he had established himself a little more firmly, that whoever has been employed in Columbus would want him to do well. I mean, a player like that, it's a very important player for the organization. But, I think there's a mutual bit of frustration there. There may be a little bit of doubt in the Blue Jackets' minds about what kind of prospect he really is. I mean, it's tough to say. But also, I think that the flip side of this is, this is a player who would welcome a change, who I think, likes the idea of moving on. And he has immense trade value. I mean, the fact that so many teams have engaged with the Blue Jackets during this process tells you that, he's someone that's going to get them back something they feel good about. Now, I'm not saying whatever the final package is, I'm not pre-stamping it as like that was a home run for Columbus, but I am saying that they are in a position where they're going to get a player back that they really like. And in Jiricek's case, he's going to go to an organization that is just tripping over themselves, excited that they got someone at his age with his skill sets and attributes, to bring into their organization and give a fresh start to. And so I do think that there's an element where it becomes mutually beneficial, where for whatever reason, and it's not a matter of necessarily big arguments and blow-ups. It doesn't have to be as dramatic as it sounds, but I do think the well can get a little poisoned when, the team hasn't won anything since he's been there. People are just getting fired over and over since he's been there. He hasn't established himself in the kind of role he'd want, that the team would want him to have. And, I think that wears on everyone. And so, with a fresh front office, or at least the GM and Don Waddell, I think there's a chance to take a fresh look at this and maybe get another younger player in, that they can start to work with and just, basically have a clean parting of the ways. So that's my best understanding, is it just has not been a stable place for him to try to establish himself as a pro. It hasn't gone well. And now we're at the point where both sides are, I'd say, enthusiastic about the possibility of what comes next.
Anything else you want to mention about David before I move on to the New York Rangers?
No, I just hope that he isn't traded by the time you're hearing this, because there might be a few hours between when we record and when it's posted live.
Yeah. See,
there's a feeling it could happen quickly is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Like before we started recording, CJ emphasized that we discussed this player because it seemed as if a move was imminent. So we'll be on the lookout for that.
Yeah. Something less than imminent. Like I don't think it's happening in the next 20 minutes, but somewhere in the next day or two certainly seems possible.
Let's get to the New York Rangers. They are open for business. It seems like 2 players in particular have come up, Chris Kreider and Jacob Trouba. What are you hearing on both?
Well, I mean, what's sort of been out there, I think, is it's worth revisiting. I mean, how unusual the circumstance is where, Chris Drury with a team that is holding down a playoff spot, certainly not defending their recent round of play. They had a tough end of their road trip through Western Canada. They lost the first game back at Madison Square Garden in Jim Montgomery's debut with the St. Louis Blues. It hasn't been going well in the very near picture here for the Rangers, but overall this season, it's not as though everything's been terrible, but it hasn't been up to what the ownership, what management wants to see. And so, he put out a trade memo to the other GMs, which naturally then makes its way into the public domain, that among the players he's willing to trade include his captain, Jacob Trouba, who obviously had some trade rumors around him at the draft and at the early part of the summer. And also Chris Kreider, who's, been a longtime member of the organization, I think coming up on 900 games, if I'm not mistaken, as a New York Ranger, and, scored a lot of goals for them over these last number of seasons. So, that alone is headline stuff. I do think the Rangers would look at trading Ryan Lindgren, Capo Caco. There's been some talk about Condre Miller. I don't have any, confirmation of that. But the point is they're considering pretty big potential changes to a roster that's won a lot of games, that won playoff series last spring. Players that have been important parts of their culture, and it's pretty early in the year. And so to me, the story isn't just, one or more of these guys might be traded. It's the fact that this is even something we're in a position to talk about, before Thanksgiving is kind of wild. And again, speaks to, I think, a level of urgency in New York. They got a lot of contractual decisions, coming up this summer. As you would remember, they still haven't signed to Igor Shesterkin. But there's other players that are in that same vein that are due for a new contract, and it's not clear how that'll all shake down. And, it just feels as though there's a lot of pressure on the Rangers to try to make a deal happen. I don't know if it'll go happen with Trouba and Kreider. They both have 15-team no-trade clauses, so they do have some ability to protect essentially half the league that, can dictate where they're not going to go. But, I think they're also players that have some value. And the truth is, nobody in New York feels good right now. Maybe the fallout of this, no matter what happens on the trade front in the near future, is like, how could you feel good in that dressing room? I mean, basically nobody can feel too secure. I mean, Alexis Lafreniere just signed a big extension and is playing well this year. I think he's probably not too worried about his own immediate future, but a lot of significant players in the locker room just are probably walking on eggshells. That's another part of this, Julian, is the Rangers have not been happy with their veterans. I mean, when you look at the success of the team, they've had a number of good performances, good to great performances, frankly, by the younger members of the roster. But the players that have been there before, I mean, Zibanejad's had a tough year. Vincent Trocheck is off what would be expected of him. A lot of the, obviously the Kreiders and the Troubas when they get mentioned in trade type of talks. And so I don't think they're going to radically reinvent this roster by any means, but it's a compelling time. I mean, it's always showtime at Madison Square Garden, but it's like showtime on and off the ice around the Rangers these days. And yeah, I mean, what happens next? I don't have that answer because, clearly they're willing to trade big pieces, but also part of you goes, why, right? Mm-hmm. Why is this happening? Because it's not a team at the bottom. They're not in the Bruins position, for example, right? I mean, as much as it was kind of I think we called it at the time when the Bruins fired Jim Montgomery, like this season was sort of a fall guy for that situation. I don't think we thought he was the fault, but we could see why they were making a big change because, they had been blown out in 5 games already in the year. Just things weren't going well there. It seemed really off. I'm not saying it feels on with the Rangers, but they're not at that level of crisis. And yet here we are talking about this.
You think of why, I think of for what, in the sense that, and not to just stick on those two players in Kreider and Trouba, but I mean, we're not talking about guys on the cheapest cap hits. In particular, Jacob Trouba, $8 million is his cap hit. Like, whoever takes him on, obviously there's the size, the physical aspect of his game, and the leadership with that too. That is a hefty salary you're bringing in. I imagine, what is it going to be, like a salary for salary type of deal? I'm very curious as to what the Rangers would even want for these players.
Well, Kreider has more value, right? And just for what you mentioned, is it 2 more years? I think after this one on his deal, it's $6.5 million. You know, he still puts the puck in the net. I know he doesn't have an assist yet this year, which is kind of just a statistical oddity, but you know, he's still a big body that knows how to score, that has experience. You know, I think for a team, you'd want to be sure that he's comfortable. You know, he's someone that he's always been a player, seems like, and I don't say this in a bad way, can almost get in his own head a little bit. Like he's a sort of player you don't want thinking too much. And you can only imagine what it must be like for him, for his family, to have all this out so publicly, right? And so if there was ever a time you were probably thinking too much, I'm guessing this might be it. And so I'm curious how that will affect his performance in the short term, but maybe bigger picture, you know, if a team's trading for him, are you sure he wants to be there? I mean, I think you'd want some assurances there that it can work. But I mean, there's a number of teams out there looking for scoring. You know, you can't tell me the Buffalo Sabres couldn't use a player like Chris Kreider. Heck, even Boston, you know, and you go down the list. I mean, if you're getting somewhere near his best, I think $6.5 million in this cap environment is totally fair for what he does. And so it's really about, does someone want to step up and make that deal? I mean, it's just, I think it's almost a hard deal to make because you're almost unsure if you're the team trading. Like what's going on here? Like why is this happening? I think you nailed it with Trouba. I mean, to me, to trade him, you're either sending a contract back of some sort that you need, or you're getting them to retain some salary on him, or both. And it does feel as though it's inevitable that some sort of Rangers Trouba divorce is in the offing here. That one might wait till the summer. Maybe in the summer, even he'd be more willing to work with them in terms of the trade list and everything too. You know, it's a hard thing in season. You're talking about a guy with a family. In his case, you know, he's got his wife who's in residency training to be a doctor. Like there's just a lot of, when you have an ability not to get traded during the season, if you're a player, you're not going to do it, right? I think it's probably better to consider these moves in the offseason. So, you know, it's spicy, man. It's a spicy meatball. And I think the question is, you know, I'm not going to gauge it on one game after this came public and they just got back from Western Canada. I mean, a lot of times your first game back from that kind of road trip isn't good, but how does the team as a whole respond? You know, I actually saw Chris Kreider did an interview with Molly Walker today, and, you know, he was talking about like, maybe this is a shit we have to go through to look back on this season and be like, that made us better. I mean, that's the glass half full way of looking at it. And it could be true. Cause I mean, there's no way you look at the Rangers roster. You know, they got to the Eastern Conference final last year. And they've had playoff success prior to that. They've got quality players at every position. I mean, I'm not saying it's a perfect roster. I don't think such a thing exists in the league, but they have the horses to gallop through the NHL season. They won the President's Trophy last year. So, and really haven't tangibly or meaningfully changed what they were. But does this become a galvanizing thing for them, or does this break them apart? That's kind of what I'm wondering. I mean, it feels risky to have this play out so publicly. Honestly, I'll just say that. I mean, it's good for the media business. It gets fans talking. It gets people imagining what might be, but it might not be the best thing for their team. And we're going to learn that over the next, you know, week or 2 weeks, 3 weeks by how they play. Do they perform better, or is this a sign of true dysfunction and this thing's going to spiral off the rails? I mean, stay tuned.
I'll say this for the New York Rangers. Their saving grace is the fact that in spite of whatever struggles they may be going through, I can think of 2 other teams in that market, not in hockey, who are playing much worse than the New York Rangers are and would dominate media attention in that market anyway. I don't think you have to think too hard about who those 2 teams are, CJ.
Is this like a Jets and Giants?
It's very much a Jets and Giants situation, very much a sub. And I'm okay with it because I'm a Jets fan. So I'm allowed to take subs at the Giants, who I don't like, and the Jets, who make me miserable.
I've hated the Giants so long as a Cowboys fan, but even I'm getting to the point where it's like almost like this is too much. Like they've been so pathetic for so long. Like they haven't even been a passing concern. And I realize you might be listening to this on Thanksgiving Day, and maybe right now it's like 20-10 for the Giants over my Cowboys, and I'm eating my words because I'm saying this obviously before that game. But the Giants have been such a terrible, terrible outfit for so long. Like I almost want to see them rebound because it's been that pathetic. That's where it's at. Like the most hated rival. I mean, you could debate as a Cowboys fan. Like some might hate the Eagles more. It's hard to hate the Commanders, really. Even though, anyway, but for me, it was always the Giants. It's probably because I know so many hockey people based around New York. A lot of our colleagues and stuff are Giants fans, and I've been a Cowboys fan long enough to remember them winning those Super Bowls, the last two. And so, like, they used to rub it in my nose and all that sort of stuff. But like, man, it's been like 10 years since I heard from Dan Rosen about the Giants. So I'm just wondering what's going on.
All I just wanted to say was, as a Jets fan, if I can't be happy about my season, the Giants shouldn't be happy either. I do want to mention one more Rangers thing. Like, we did spend all that time talking about Trouba, and we spent all that time talking about Kreider. If I'm a GM and I'm looking at what's available from the Rangers, it might be a little bit more enticed by Keandre Miller, a younger asset and obviously much cheaper. Same deal for Ryan Lindgren, maybe a little bit more too. Like, I'm very curious to know if maybe other GMs end up being more attracted to those pieces because of the age of those two players, because of them being much more affordable for their salary caps. It just makes more sense to me. At least if I was one of the 32 NHL GMs, I'd be looking at those two a little bit more than Trouba or even Chris Kreider. That being said, if I had to pick between Trouba and Kreider, I'd pick Kreider. Right.
Well, and don't sleep on Capo Caco either, because I know that he's maybe lost some of the shine that you get for being a second overall pick, but he's certainly played better this season. Still only 24 years old. Reason to believe he's still got good hockey ahead of him. And, he's been out there in various ways, shapes, and forms already. But, they only signed him to a 1-year extension last offseason. I think at the time, the feeling was it was just sort of, they were protecting an asset. They got him at a number they could live with. But they were always leaving the door open to trading him. And so, I mean, this isn't all just, hey, take our older players that may be past their primes, might be a little overpriced. This is, come and make us an offer on some of these other guys. I think that a lot of players are potentially in play in New York. And I don't know if they have to get moved in the next few weeks. I mean, I don't think much changes here. I guess if they win 15 in a row from now on, maybe the band's back together and this all hey, forget that email I sent out on whatever, November 23rd. But more than likely this is going to continue to go on. And that's why I'm very curious to see how the team on the ice responds. Can they keep their dressing room together? Can they start playing better? Because if not, you can imagine how the tension is going to ratchet around that group.
For sure. This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Storyworth. If you're spending time with loved ones for the holidays, chances are you're going to hear a lot of stories, the ones you love to hear and the ones you've heard too many times. But have you ever wanted to help your loved ones capture those timeless stories, not just for themselves, but for you, your entire family, and future generations? It can seem daunting to write an entire book of life memories, but Storyworth makes it fun and easy. This sounds like a really cool concept, CJ.
Yeah, I should get Coburg Papa on this because
yes, he should.
Basically, you get an email every week. You have to respond to that question, and it tells you something about your life. All those email responses get compiled in a book that you can keep for generations in your family. And, let's face it, time moves fast, and some stories get lost to time, and this is a way to fight back against that.
You can ask questions like, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? What's the farthest you've ever traveled? Or how did you even get to school every day? Storyworth makes the entire process a breeze. All your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story, long or short, it doesn't matter. Families love Storyworth, and that's why it has more than 35,000 five-star reviews on Trustpilot, with millions of stories preserved since they were founded over 10 years ago. Help your family members share and capture their stories. this holiday season with Storyworth. Storyworth.com/Johnston and save $10 on your first purchase. That's STORYWORTH.com/Johnston to save $10 on your first purchase. Storyworth.com/Johnston.
Check your email, Dad.
What about the Ottawa Senators? Bruce Garriock from Post Media said that the Sens have been pretty aggressive in seeking a defenseman. I think that was before Artem Zub ended up on LTIR. They're about to kick off their 3-game road trip. Well, by the time you'll have heard this, they already did last night in San Jose. What are you hearing about the Ottawa Senators?
Yeah, I mean, and you would know this, obviously, being in the market and covering the team now, Julian. They've been short a D already, and then you lose Zub for extended period of time. I think it exacerbates the problem, and then you compound that with the fact that November hasn't gone so well. And my goodness, you're not dealing from a position of strength if you make that trade right now, are you? And so, I think that's where they're at. But certainly they are out canvassing to see what can be done. There's so much pressure on teams like that. I think there's a lot mounting in Detroit right now. I mean, these teams, and they have to be looking at Boston too. Like, this is an element, not to take this way off script, but the Bruins haven't exactly popped under Joe Sacco. I know they're 2-1, but like, it hasn't looked like, hey, they're going to go gangbusters here under a new head coach, who happens to have been in the organization for 10, 11 years. I just think there's opportunity in the Atlantic Division potentially. And so I think it adds even more pressure for the Senators, for the Red Wings, the Sabres in the same spot. But I mean, when we're talking about trades, for the Sens to have a stopgap there. And so, I don't know who it's going to be, but you just feel like they can't be, you don't want to go gentle into this one, right? I mean, I do think that it's, almost every series of games that go by, it could be a missed opportunity. The points are so important. The team's struggling. One thing that could help here, I have to point it out. It's the obvious, but if they could get a few more saves, it might help some of the defensive shortcomings. Like, every team is, there's components of each team, right? But they could paper over some problems if if at certain positions they were getting maybe a little outsized performance. And so, that's probably what they're hoping for in the short term while they work through this. But, there's a lot of defensemen out there, in a sense, available. But, like, do you want to go overpay for one now? Like, this is where you get into that game, right? And I'll just throw out a name. Ivan Provorov. I am confident the Blue Jackets will trade him before March 7th. But they don't have to trade him today. I mean, their team, for one, they've won more games than most of us thought at this point. So you don't need to raise the white flag on anything just yet. And secondly, if you're going to trade him today, you're getting a first round pick. But if you're the Senators, do you want to be going and giving up a first round pick for a D-man? I mean, you see what I'm going through and so, the truth is, they'll probably have to set their sights a little bit lower than a player who plays the kind of minutes Provorov does, is at the age and status that he is. But yeah, the Senators are feeling some heat there, and the injury situation complicates things, and they don't have enough depth at that position. And every passing game, man, it's got to keep building unless they can start registering some wins. And I said, if you're looking for one thing that could save you, maybe Linus Ullmark or Forsberg can get a few more points that you don't deserve, because sometimes you might need that to stop the bleeding.
To your point about wanting to give up a first round pick for a defenseman, not only do you have to think, oh man, we have to give up a first round pick. Remember, the Senators still have to give up a first round pick for everything that happened in the Evgeny Dadonov debacle. So, like, if you're giving up a first round pick in a trade, you could stand to lose 2 within the next 2-3 years. Like, that's very dicey for the Senators organization.
Well, and that's where you get into, then do we trade something from the core? Do we move one of our impact players, and in the process, maybe you feel like internally, if you're moving one of the impact forwards, of which they have a few, that you can get a defenseman back, that you can shift around some cap obligations. You can do it without giving up that kind of first round pick. I mean, that's maybe where some of that comes into play, I think, internally for debate. But man, there's a big, like, I feel like Ottawa is low key. There's some really big roster decisions to be made there. Like, this is not a time, you can't just ride it out I don't mean just this moment. I'm not talking about just the Artem Zub injury. I just mean this whole season. Like, you can't just ride it out and be like, well, whatever happens, it's more experience for this core, blah, 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 blah. Like, I think that there has to be growth there. And I think that there has to be maybe some hard decisions made. And one of those decisions, of course, could be trading one of the main players away. But it's a tough thing to do, and Steve Stale's still in his, year plus there. Like, not a lot of time to necessarily feel comfortable making that kind of move, but I could see it getting to that point because they can't let this season slip away easily, not this early. Detroit Red Wings, my TSN colleague Darren Traeger reported on Insider Trading on Tuesday that the current homestand they're just starting, that Derek Lalonde's future as a head coach could ride on it. I mean, that's how urgent things are getting in Detroit. And it's largely, it's a different position. It's a different sort of decision we're talking about, but it's underwritten by the same concern that the Red Wings have to be in the playoff mix. Like, they have to have a team that has a chance to play games at the end of the year to get in, which they did last year, to be fair. They were knocking at the door. They won some games in pretty dramatic style right down the stretch. They need that at minimum again, if not to have actual playoff dates. And so this is, I think, what's driving. We started off this whole episode and we were just talking about the broad winds around the league blowing so strongly. I think it's being driven by some of these teams that they can't sit around and wait any longer. They have to make moves. And so, yeah, I mean, Sens are on the clock. They got to get a defenseman.
Yeah, they really do. I think they could use a scoring winger as well. But yeah, the fact that that first round pick debacle thing still hangs over their heads. Gary Bettman acknowledged that it doesn't seem like he's going to revert off course from that. Michael
Don't
Andlauer
you feel like they're going to get
Amazon
it back?
Prime and said that. Do you think they will?
Only
Bettman didn't seem as if he was. It didn't seem as if when Gary Bettman was in Ottawa that he wanted to revert course on it. It didn't seem as if he was going to do that. And then Michael Andlauer on Amazon Prime the other night was saying, hey, maybe we get something like what happened with New Jersey once upon a time. Like, I think there's definitely some angling for it. Is it going to happen? I haven't heard anything that suggests to me that they're going to revert that decision that says the Senators are going to lose a first round pick for, I guess in this case, 2025 or 2026.
I just look at the past. It's hard to ignore the precedent that they set when they did it with New Jersey all those years ago after the bogus Ilya Kovalchuk cheat deal that got rejected by the league. And it was the same conditions. You have to give it up one of these 3 years. They didn't give it up the first year. They didn't give it up the second year. And lo and behold, you got to the third year and you were on good behavior and the punishment time ended early and bam, that pick disappeared. I just feel like the same conditions are there at play. I believe there was an ownership change in New Jersey in the meantime as well, which is a similar thing that happened here. I mean, this is punishment. The Dadonov trade was made when Pierre Dorian was the GM of the team. The late Eugene Melnyk was still owning the team. Mm-hmm. And so it just feels like Gary has no reason, Gary Bettman, to come out and say, hey, we're going to do this thing in a year and a half.
Right.
Like, why would he? I'm just saying, why would he? Has no incentive to even hint that it's on his mind, but it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So this isn't me insidering. This is me looking at the picture and going like, yeah, they've done it before. Why wouldn't they do it again?
I'm waiting until they do it. I think you make a lot of sense, but until they do it, it's still something that they have to worry about. Can you imagine if you're the Ottawa Senators and you're thinking exactly like what you're thinking, and you're just like, all right, well, we can move on from this 2025 first round pick. I mean, we're not going to lose 2026, and then you lose 2026. What the hell is going to happen next? You're up Schitt's Creek without a paddle.
Well,
sorry for swearing.
To be fair, lots of the best teams in the league deal away their first round pick every year.
Would you consider the Ottawa Senators one of the best teams in the league? No. Don't
That's the problem.
They're not.
That's the problem. But I'm just saying.
A team, mind you, we didn't even bring this up in all of this. Their prospect pool, it's lacking.
That ain't it.
That ain't it at all. So you need those first round picks. If I'm the Ottawa Senators, I need every single possible assurance that I'm not going to have to give up my first round pick in 2025 or 2026. Just period. Because that's a team that could use those first round picks. I get it. You have to draft well in every single round. but that team could use some first round picks over the next few seasons.
Yeah, well, I mean, the numbers are the numbers. You have a better chance of hitting on a first round pick than you do a fourth round pick than you do a seventh round pick. And you have a better chance at hitting on a third overall pick than a 10th overall pick than a 102nd overall pick. So yes, there's no magic in it, but the earlier you're drafting, the better, generally speaking, in terms of your likelihood of finding NHL players.
For sure. But hey, you could be like the Columbus Blue Jackets and decide, hey, you know what? We don't need this 6th overall pick anymore for reasons.
Hey, let's just wait and see what they get back.
For reasons. I'm not saying
they might get back a former 10th overall pick. Like they might get something similar. Who knows? We'll see.
Is Josh Norris really the piece to trade if you're the Ottawa Senators? That is the name that has come up quite a bit in the last few days.
I mean, I don't know anything specific on whether he has to be the one. I can understand why the name is out there. I can understand why that thought is out there. Start with who you're not trading. Tim Stützle. I don't think you're trading Brady Tkachuk.
I don't think so either.
Like, to me, you're not even, those are like very short conversations unless you're getting back something pretty exceptional. Like we're talking another player at similar age with similar contributions.
Jake Sanderson is on that list too. Look, Tim Stützle is your number one center. Jake Sanderson's your number one defenseman. Brady Tkachuk is your captain. Not to mention, considered how this week went with the leadership stuff and all that. Thought there was a lot of passionate defenses from members of the organization. I think those three look like untouchables right now for this team.
Right. And you might not, as I say, you might not brand them untouchables because there could be another player out there in the league you would trade them for, but it's a short list is the point. It's like you would need someone in a similar age band that probably does certain similar things. And then it's almost like, why is this trade happening? Because that wouldn't happen. But they're as close to untouchables as they get. And so I understand why you arrive at Josh Norris. He's had health concerns. Hasn't gone well for him either. Maybe is my best way to put it. But I don't have specific knowledge on I don't think they're shopping him because I'm pretty sure I would have heard that, but maybe they're open to ideas. We get into semantics with trades because people talk all the time, Julian, as we're always reminded. And they do, to be fair, GMs do touch base with each other all the time and they're constantly gauging where their rosters are at and saying, hey, would you ever think about this? And would this ever make sense? And like a lot of that stuff is very hypothetical. Maybe the way almost similar to how you might make a fantasy football trade or something. But, and then of course, sometimes those things are very real and a team is trying to move a player. I think it's more the former than the latter with where things are at with Norris and the Senators. They think about it, but certainly not anything they've decided they have to do.
The one thing I'll just mention, and then we can move off of Ottawa, Stützle, Josh Norris, Shane Pinto, 3 really good young centers. And again, the Senators don't have that much depth in their prospect pool. So it's like if they move on from one of those players, it's not like they have a really good young player who they can call up from Belleville and say, hey, you know what? He could at least take that spot. We have this surplus of centers. Like that's my one hesitancy about moving on from a player like Josh Norris. I get that the injury concerns have been there with the shoulders. I think 3 shoulder surgeries for him. I think he's been off to a somewhat decent start. He's playing a little unafraid. Just if you move on from him, like I think if you're like, I worry about the center depth for this team. If you're moving on from one, I mean, I think we can count out Stützle from this, but if you're moving away from Pinto, if you're moving away from Josh Norris, you got to find a way to make that center depth work for your team. At least that's at least how I see it. But just you got to be careful about that move. I wonder just with that front office. I forget if you brought this up in the chat or someone else brought it up in our group chat, but like. I feel like there hasn't been like unless you want to count the Linus Ullmark trade, what has been like the big defining trade for Steve Staios? Like this could be it.
It's still coming.
That's it, right? Like whatever he could do to get that defenseman, that could be that move.
That Ullmark decision is his defining move of so far because the decision to trade for him, the decision to sign him at an $8.25 million contract times 4 years. That's all the same decision to me. I realize there's 2 things that happened there and there's months in between the 2, but you didn't trade for him unless you knew you were signing him and you knew probably roughly what the amount was going to be within a reasonable, variance. And you were comfortable with that when you made the deal. Big decision that hasn't worked out so far, but early days on that decision. I mean, but yeah, I think the big defining decision is how you navigate this next stage with these core players. Because I don't think there's room to keep them all forever. And frankly, I think there's an ongoing case being built that maybe they need something different. They need a different look, a different element. It's not saying that any one of them is a problem, but maybe the group together isn't enough. Something bold might be in the air.
Are you hearing anything else around the league? I mentioned the Rangers. I mentioned the Senators. We mentioned David Jiricek. Is there anything else you're hearing around the league?
That's very broad. I mean, there's just lots
it's
of
a very broad question. It was
lots
very
of trade wins.
broad.
I mean, obviously the Canadians are looking at what they can do. It's been a very difficult time there. They're getting Patrick Laine back on Saturday, which is exciting. You know, first games that he's going to get to play after getting injured in preseason. But it's fair to say it's been a disappointing start to the season for Montreal. So you add those to the frustrated. I wanted to say the frustrated four, but it might even be bigger than four. The frustrated. Got to think of a catchy name for the group. Predators still aren't winning many games. They make another really minor trade on this day, but I just feel like they are absolutely in business. Barry Trotz is looking at what he can do. Kyle Dubas he's not sitting on his hands. I mean, he's already traded one of his pending UFAs on Lars Eller very early. He's already now traded away a draft pick to get Philip Tomasino, who fits a specific kind of player that I think the Penguins are targeting, which is young guys with upside, that obviously in the short term, they change the complexion of your team, but potentially have a chance to also be around for the longer term. And so I think that they're scouring the market for those types of guys. There's talk of Höglander in Vancouver. It's gone terribly for him. He got extended already. His new contract hasn't kicked in yet. 3-year deal times 3. He got it in training camp. And he's gone, I think, 15 games without a goal, something like that. Didn't play at all in the third period of their game on Tuesday in Boston. I'm not saying he's being traded, but it just feels like, man, like everywhere you look, it's a whack-a-mole game. Like you hit one mouse and another one pops up. So nothing that I'm saying is happening this second. I can say there's been some talk about Carolina too. My sense is that yes, they've looked around the goaltending market, but it's not because they're making a move this week. I think it's just understanding, Frederik Andersen had the knee procedure. Kochetkov's been out with, I don't know if they called it a concussion, but some sort of head related injury. That one's not thought to be too serious, but the idea is they might have to get a goalie at some point this year. And so I think they're doing what we might call advanced scouting. I don't see a trade coming there in the short term unless something changes quickly. But yeah, there's just a lot going on, and it's a beautiful thing. Frankly, what are the Bruins going to do? I didn't even get into any of that, but
dude, we didn't even bring up the fact you got shouted out on Pat McAfee's show. Speaking of the Bruins,
I didn't watch the clip. So,
oh really?
No, I didn't feel comfortable.
Why
with
not? You should listen to it. It was not. I mean, look, they were talking about the fact that we discussed Brad Marchand a couple shows ago, and the guys on the show seemed pretty complimentary of you. You should listen to it. It's a 30-second clip that producer Drew painstakingly took the time to cut up for you in the group chat.
Okay, maybe I'll watch it later, but I haven't heard it as of now. But thanks, Pat. Glad you're listening. Glad you're watching.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's just about everything for trade talk, unless you're holding out on us with something that we don't know.
No, that's it for the minute. My scrambled brain at the end of a day, I'm probably forgetting something, but c'est la vie. We're going to have another episode in a couple days, so.
Yeah, more time to talk about that. And of course, the Four Nations rosters when they drop. Do you have a stick tap before we get out of here?
I do. I kind of have two. Okay. I'll make them quick. The first one, I have to shout out Paul Bissonnette, just a guy I go back a long time with. It sounded like he had a really harrowing, crazy, scary story. I mean, it's easy to trump it up, but the police in Scottsdale say there was 6-on-1 attack on him. So I'm just happy to hear that he came out of that okay. I can't even imagine being in his shoes. So stick tack to him for doing the right thing there in that restaurant. And I'm just glad things turned out well and that this isn't a worse off story. And the other one is I actually have to shout out St. Louis Blues social media because I saw this clip when Jim Montgomery addressed the team after their win at Madison Square Garden. But the second part of it, if you didn't watch enough, I thought it was really cool that the Blues are using Kelly Chase's old shoulder pads, these old Cooper shoulder pads. And, Kelly, for those who don't know, is a friend to everyone who's been around hockey. Just a super guy. I worked with him years ago at the NHL Network, but I mean, if you want to ask his number of friends around the NHL, you're going to be writing names down all day. And unfortunately, he's back battling cancer, second time for him. And, Braden Shen, the captain of the Blues, just mentioned that their player of the game now puts on Kelly Chase's old shoulder pads. And they basically just said, Kelly's fighting for his life and we're fighting with him while he's going through this. And I just thought that's such a cool, we've seen so many teams now. Basically every team gives out a player of the game type of thing. And some of them are goofy. Some of them have a little more meaning, but I was like, wow, that has a lot of heart. And so thinking about Kelly, obviously this is Hockey Fights Cancer Month, November too. So just thought that whole thing was nice. So happy to learn on social media this week that Paul Biznasty came through okay. It's a tough situation and that the Blues are, fighting alongside Kelly Chase as I hope Kelly knows we are too.
I think that's well said, first off. I will give my stick tap to Casper Dogevins.
Baby.
This week. Long time, but he was a Ottawa Senator once upon a time. He was a member of the Boston Bruins too. Also responsible for what I think it's my favorite shootout attempt of all time, where he flips the stick blade, puts on top of the puck, tries to do the little spin move on Tuukka Rask, almost beats him. I think he scored in the AHL, very close to getting it done in the NHL. Also won a bronze medal with Latvia at the World Championship in 2023. It's the greatest Latvia has ever done in the history of that tournament, just in any of these senior tournaments when it comes to hockey. So Casper Dogevins, we get the forefront of that. Really cool. Shout out to him. Stick taps to Casper Dogevins, who hangs them up this week.
Really fun guy too. I remember interviewing him way earlier in my career, much earlier when he was over here. Did he play for the St. Michael's Majors?
Yes.
Or the Mississauga Ice Dogs? I think it was St. Michael's.
But he definitely played for one of those teams. I literally just had the page.
Sorry to spring this on you, but I didn't know you were going to shout him out.
Toronto. Yes, he played for the St. Michael's Majors. Right. Yes, he did.
So I first encountered him all the way back then, 102 years ago. And then I also remember he was part of that Sens team, and I covered that playoff run in 2017, right? That went to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Final. Or am I mistaken?
He might have been. He would have been in KHL by then.
Oh, which playoff run was he on with the Sens?
He was. So he had an AHL playoff run in 2011.
No NHL playoff games with the Sens.
I'm trying to think what NHL. He played a playoff game in 2012. So maybe that run, or you played a game in that run. So because I made it up there. I
remember him from something. I was around the Sens a lot in those days. Back in that time, I'd cover the Leafs until their last game of the regular season, and then whoever I was working for would send me somewhere else in Canada. I covered a lot of Habs in that era, playoff games, and I covered a bunch of Sens series.
He was on the Bruins in 2013.
No, but that's not what I'm thinking of. It was with Ottawa. Anyway, I don't remember. But sorry, I'm butchering you did such a nice tribute, and now I'm just like blah 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 blah. But I just remember he was always a fun guy to be around. He loved hockey. The guy played forever.
Yes. To your point about 2011, actually, I bring up 2011. Won a Calder Cup with the Binghamton Senators in 2011. But you're not thinking of that run, obviously.
No, I wasn't. I've never been to Binghamton. I've heard some things, but I've never been.
I think I've been on a bus that drove through Binghamton, but I've never been to Binghamton. I didn't get there in my 1 year in upstate New York.
Have you been to Utica?
No, never been to Utica.
We should do an upstate New York AHL tour, like all these cities that, I've been to Syracuse. Obviously, you've been to Syracuse. That's another AHL city in that kind of part of the world. I've been to Rochester for some games. But anyway,
we can do.
I digress.
Save that idea after our next live show, whenever that is.
Yeah, we should just have a tour bus and just go from city to city. It's kind of a Hanson sort of a shout out to Slapshot almost or something. The old War Memorial.
Yes, the War Memorial Arena. Love that place. Love that old barn. Get your questions in now for our Monday show, whether on Twitter. Sorry, X, as people like to call it, Blue Sky or Discord or wherever. Send us messages however you can. We'll get to as many as we can.
Carrier
on
pigeon?
our next episode. Carrier pigeon. I love carrier pigeon.
You can't send it by mail in Canada. They're on strike anyway.
Yes, I'm very aware of that fact. There's at least one package I've been waiting on that I don't think I'll ever get because of, anyway, you know what? I digress. Let's get out of here. Subscribe to the podcast, leave a like and a rating, and peace, guys. Bye.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.